This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. This is episode 324, and this is a GABF Gold episode of the podcast. We're splitting this up with two guests, and we're focusing on mixed culture fermentation on this episode with two recent gold medal winners from the Great American Beer Festival. Joining me in the second half of the episode are Joel Stickrod and Spencer Longhurst of Barrique from Nashville, who won gold for their Wet Hop Strata 2023 in the wood and barrel-aged sour beer category. But joining me first is Kyle Vetter of 1840 Brewing, who won gold for I Don't Want to Wait in the fruited wood and barrel-aged sour beer category. Welcome to the podcast, Kyle.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
We are going to talk about how you go about mixed culture fermentation, how you go about that kind of fruit addition and maceration in order to get compelling, exciting, and energetic, good, funky, sour, wood-aged beer. Before we talk about that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. They know brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, and nor do they. G&D uses quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. With 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all the information you need, providing you with the peace of mind that your operation is running smoothly. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. This episode is also sponsored by BSG and their partners HVG, who bring you the very best in German hops, including Amira, the latest from their hop breeding program. With its classic hoppy, slightly herbal, and zesty lemon aromas, it's the ideal hop for those looking to capture the traditional flavor of a classic German lager. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn more, and scheduling freight carriers should be the last thing on a brewer's mind. So why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard has partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your flavored craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes. To get started, head over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Kyle, why don't you give me a little bit of your background? Share some of your background, where you came from, and what your arc through brewing looked like, and how you ended up launching 1840.
Sure. So I started brewing in college, but I'm from this area. So I grew up in a suburb north of Milwaukee and wanted to ski for college. That's basically why I got a humanities degree, is because I was really there for the outdoor lifestyle. And that brought me to Durango, Colorado. During that time frame, I learned how to homebrew with some buddies in college. And thankfully, our first batch turned out pretty good. So we kind of got the bug, and we're like, wow, that was cool. Let's do that more. And it was about 3 months after I turned 21. There was a job fair at school, and I went specifically to meet and discuss working for Ska Brewing in Durango, and immediately set up an interview. And amazingly, the best thing that ever happened, I was hired into a brewery right after I was 21. Of course, you start at the bottom. I was packaging cans, bottles, labeling, wax dipping their bombers. Eventually started doing some cellar work, carbonating beers, cleaning tank, transparent beers, those kinds of things. That time period of my life ended a little quicker because I got an opportunity to move back to Wisconsin and start a restaurant that we were eventually going to turn into a brew pub. That was the long-term goal. A lot of minutia in that story we don't need to get into, but I ended up not sticking with that individual who we were running the business together. And but I needed something to do. I just moved back to Wisconsin after college. I left brewing, which made me sad. Actually, I cried when I quit that job. I was even though I had great opportunity, I was just like, this is what I want to do. So that was always stuck with me. And I sold real estate for 5 years. Had an amazing career. I got into that because my mom was a nationwide top real estate agent. And she's like, well, you just quit your job. I could use some help, start working for me and then go from there. So I ended up working in real estate for 5 years, being involved in almost $70 million in real estate transactions, and really just got burnt out. That whole time I was homebrewing, continuing my passion there. And, my wife and I, when she moved to Milwaukee with me from college, we met in college. We said in 5 years, we're moving back to the mountains. The plan was this restaurant is going to be somewhere in 5 years. We're going to move back to the mountains and start another arm of it there. Well, that didn't work out, but we stuck to our guns and we moved back to the Aspen area. We lived in Carbondale, and I reached out to my old brewing buddies, and one of them had become the head brewer at Aspen Brewing Company. So I said, "Hey, we're moving back to the mountains. Any chance that you need help?" And he did. So I was able to get back to the professional side of things as an assistant brewer for Aspen Brewing Company. When I got there, we were doing about 1,200, maybe 2,000 barrels a year. And in the 4.5 years I was there, we grew to almost 7,000 barrels a year. And we had, during that early infancy of my time there, we had just launched the barrel program. That head brewer went to do his own thing, and I actually kind of decided to make the barrel program my baby and really grew up our wood cellars into something where we had a couple of brands that we were regularly making, and really just fell in love with the magic of mixed culture beers, barrel fermentation, barrel aging. That's really what I, wanted to do, inspired by, what side project I've been doing. And, Casey had just opened in the valley there in Glenwood Springs. So many cool Colorado breweries and Washington, Oregon breweries doing awesome mixed culture stuff that I really just wanted to explore that and learn more there. And that's sort of what brought us back to Milwaukee is, I just had a kid on the way. I just gotten a big raise, living in one of the most expensive towns in Colorado. And I realized that if I wanted to stay in, and chase my passion in beer as a career, that the only way to really kind of get any sort of opportunity for ourselves was to try to do this thing ourselves, run the business the way we wanted to run, put the risk out there and hopefully get the rewards. So that's when I started working on the business plan for 1840, and
plus a new baby on the way, having some family to help support. That there's some real logic in that too.
Oh, big time. Being close to the family was definitely not a negative. We ended up back in Milwaukee, launched 1840. We started brewing in spring of 2017 and started selling beer in August of 17 with the original intent of being very purposeful and being a focused farmhouse brewery, barrel fermented or barrel aged only. And it's interesting how quickly that changed for us, because and I really, it's fun to look back and kind of tease myself, you're going to be so intentional, and you really didn't take that long to break from that. And the reason is because our first month we had 3 barrel fermented beers. Our next month we had 4, and I was sort of doing the Casey model where we were only open once a month at first. And then going into my 3rd month, I was only going to have 2 beers. The beers I'd planned on being ready weren't ready. And so I decided, hey, hazy IPAs are starting to become something on the scene in Colorado before I left. And they were really sort of blowing up around that time. 2016, 15 to 17 was a really big time for hazy IPA. And no one was doing them in Milwaukee. So we're like, hey, I have this stainless equipment that we thought we'd only use to pre-ferment and barrel age beers, but I can turn a beer in 2 weeks. Let's get this one out. And, my wife and I love to drink IPAs, and we said, why not? And at that point, that went so well. Then I'm like, okay, we can do anything. Why am I pigeonholing myself? I want to make all of the beer. I joke, I'm a very ADD brewer. I'm always wanting to try something I haven't done before, or try a historical style or a modern take on something, that we decided to, we can make whatever we want now. And so instead of being hyper-focused on one type of beer, we said we're going to be hyper-focused on quality. And that's where our motto comes from, drink slow beer. I'm not sure if you heard that yet. It started off very literal, slow beer, 6 months minimum to make our products. 3 months to 3 years is kind of, that range of it, where these beers could fall. And now Drink Slow Beer has evolved into sort of an ethos and a vibe, right? So if I'm going to make a beer that's going to take 3 years to make, I'm going to put a lot of care and attention in the ingredients we source for that, and the recipe, and everything along the way. And we thought, well, we do the same thing when I make a beer that takes 2 or 3 weeks. And we really put that same care and attention into just nailing it and having it taste how we want. And also, we hope that when people get our products in their hand, that they kind of slow down and enjoy the moment, maybe talk about the beer with their friends, And so to us, that's slow beer. It's both a timeline and an ethos and a vibe. And that's how we sort of have carved our niche in Milwaukee.
Sure. What does 1840 look like as a business now? Multiple locations, or production, tap room? Where does most of your focus, business wise, lie?
I wish it was more on growing our production, growing into our capacity. But right now, so much of our focus is on a new tap room. We're launching a new tap room concept this fall in a suburb about 45 minutes from Milwaukee called West Bend. Going to be multi-part, all day type of service. So we're going to have a coffee shop, tasting room, and restaurant component where we focus on Detroit style pizza and sous vide wings. So, that's really taken a lot of our energy right now, is just getting ready for that. I didn't want to really jump too hard into growing our distro footprint this year, knowing that, this was coming. And then I'm like, oh, sorry, I got to contract I got to, withhold a beer back because my tap room is doing well. So, we started off with our Bayview location. We're adding West Bend, and then once West Bend's up and running, we kind of see how the flow of liquid is going to move. We're going to continue to grow our footprint. So right now we sell beer across the entire state of Wisconsin, but we'd love to sell more beer in Wisconsin and also possibly expand into some of our neighboring states.
Sure. What's the approximate volume? How much are you going to make this year?
We're going to be right around 700 barrels this year. It's not a ton.
Yeah.
We've got,
sure.
We've got the capacity going to be online soon. Actually, our new G&D chiller just needs to get connected. And then we're going to have the capacity to do about 2,900 barrels a year. But it's just, one thing at a time. We're bootstrapping this business and kind of doing it all on our own and really trying to grow organically and not rush, and also just make sure that the liquid stays top tier. But I'm super excited. Once West Bend's up and running, and we're going to start growing into our capacity here, and that's going to be a whole new thing that I've actually got experience on. Opening a second tap room, this is the first time for me, but growing a brewery from a small volume to a large one is something I've done, and I'm looking forward to that.
And you found your way back into the restaurant business in Milwaukee through a whole different route.
Yeah, sure, I'm crazy.
Let's. I want to talk about brewing mixed fermentation beer in particular, because obviously that's top of mind for us. I don't want to weigh with its gold medal, but also the Contessa Table for One table saison that you've sent to us for our upcoming Best in Beer and Saison issue, which I'll spoil it now for everybody. Scored a 97 with our blind panel. Some really cool stories there. You all are doing some excellent work in this field of mixed culture fermentation. I want to kind of dive into your brewing mind and try to understand how you go about doing some of the things. Before we do that, take your brewing to the next level with AccuBrew's revolutionary fermentation monitoring system, now predicting specific gravity. With AccuBrew, you'll have precise control over the fermentation process and ensure consistent, high-quality results. Their cloud-based app and compact sensor work together to monitor specific gravity, fermentation activity, clarity, and temperature. AccuBrew is CIP-ready and designed to stay out of your way. Their set-it-and-forget-it solution streamlines systems and processes, confirms consistency, and helps detect problems before they ruin a batch. Join the AccuBrew community today and experience 24/7 peace of mind. Visit AccuBrew.io to learn more. Also, ProBrew is excited to announce that they are currently featuring short lead times between 2 and 4 weeks for their in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers. These can fillers run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, fill out their contact form on www.probrew.com or email contactus@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. Kyle, talk to me about mixed culture fermentation.
Yeah.
Where did you all start with this? Obviously you mentioned your goal was to tap into, some of this inspiring work that you've seen from Colorado and the West Coast and, Pacific Northwest, so many great producers of these. As you were starting to define an 1840 approach to mixed culture beer, where did it start with? What were there some specific beers that you wanted to make? Was this culture driven? Was this fruit or ingredient driven? How did you start building this program, and what were those beers that formed the kind of foundation of it?
So I wanted to make everything because so much of my experience in mixed culture beers, using oak as an ingredient, not just a storage vessel, was limited to just a couple of brands I could convince the ownership to allow me to make, right? So I had all these beers I wanted to try. And so I didn't really set out to say, I'm only going to make Saison, or I'm only going to make one type of mixed culture beer. But when we started, what I decided to do was start with just 3 types of beer. So we started with a large batch of a Saison base. Then we did a large batch tree soured. So we actually kettle soured a Goza type base, but then barrel fermented that with mixed culture, but only Brett. So that way, like, I could really dial in the acidity because, I was trying to, in that series, keep things real light. And then we also started with a brown bearded guard. What's super interesting about I Don't Want to Wait is that came out of the barrel we call the Mothership. And the Mothership is a barrel I've had since we first started brewing beer. We call it that because it has sort of contained so many beers over the years, because when we first started filling those 3 batches, bearded guard, the Goza base, and the Saison base, into a variety of different barrels, I put a little bit of all those worts into this puncheon. I should note, I bought the puncheon for my buddy Troy, and so we figured, hey, it's got some of his magic still living in there. We're going to fill it with a little bit of all the worts from these first 2 batches and a little bit of all the yeast that we used in all the batches. And then as we were building out the brewery, because remember, we started brewing months before our taproom opened, anytime we'd share a cool bottle, we're dumping the dregs in there. And so we really developed a completely unique, unduplicatable culture inside this barrel, pulling a little bit of what might have still been living in the wood, all these different cultures that we were putting into our initial base blending stock. And it is now only made, I Don't Want to Wait was the 3rd beer to ever come out of that punch. We've been open, 6 years now. It was kind of, we started, all right, I'm gonna just cast a wide net and then have this blending stock, and we'll go from there. And then we just continued to evolve. So I've continued to work in more large format barrels, and different types of oak. I Don't Want to Wait was our sort of a period of time where we were experimenting with different grains to see how they fed the yeast and bacteria over time. So this was a spelt Saison. So we've done spelt or rye, amber Saison, and then as far as the yeast goes, I've worked a ton with Nick at the Yeast Bay. He's from this area, and we've gotten along. He's been a great resource, and I like to just try some of the interesting cultures that he has. His house sour blend was probably one of my favorite early Saison blends. I found that it really puts off a lot of cool acidity but it's balanced, and great funk characters. Also, everything is just about that blend, at least in the way that we've utilized it, has been very balanced. So yeah, we started sort of all over and have continued to be all over. And then the thing about barrel aging that I love, barrel fermentation, is that these sort of become, this sounds super cliche, paints on your palate, and then how you recompose them is really where the artistry of blending beer comes back. And that's something that I am really passionate about, because it's fun to go through that process. Taste these beers when they're young, taste them when they're mature, put them back together, and or maybe say, hey, I want to add different spices or hops or fruit to this beer. So that whole process is what I'd like to focus on, really, like slow beers. Think about it all the way along, taste it all the way along, and just roll with it.
It's interesting that you are using basically, three different kind of, fermentation processes there, whether that's, purchased pitches, ferment or pre-acidified, fermented beer that's then aged on Brett, or then using this, kind of ongoing culture that you maintain and using all three of those kinds of fermentation approaches to, to then build more stock that you can blend on. It sounds to me also like you're using a lot of smaller barrels, not fooders, and then maybe puncheons in order to kind of produce this kind of, diversity that you then pull from.
Yeah, I've really focused more on small barrels early on, because I was really like, I just want to have a variety of stock to blend from. And now as we've gotten a little bit more intentional with some projects, like um, we're not necessarily looking at as a blending thing, is when we've gotten into a lot of the punch and aging. It's nice to be able to put 4 or 5 barrels of beer in a one vessel and have it be consistent if you sort of have an intention of outcome that you're looking for. And with the mothership, we've not really had an intention outcome ever. This particular beer, I was like, all right, this beer is mature. It happens to be summer. Let's go get some Montmorency cherries. And so we made some connections up in Door County, and we're able to get these just amazing Door County cherries that we were, just super inspired by the flavor of those. I'm like, man, if the beer tastes anything like this, and then, sure enough, they added a ton of color, ton of flavor, insane pie cherry characteristics. So yeah, it's fun to be able to have access to those ingredients and have a product say like, I'm ready for fruit. And then it's like, well, what fruit is ready? Let's go out and get it. And, that's what I love, is like, the beer tells you what it needs.
And it's a beautiful beer. I'm drinking some now, and I'm halfway through a bottle just through this conversation. Very easy to drink. Just the acidity is nicely balanced. I'm curious about something you said earlier about how grains and grist additions have impacted the way that the cultures function. Talk to me a little bit about that. This is a spelt base in this one. How have you found that in your experiments using different grains in these bases, how has that impacted, not just the fermentation, but, say finished mouthfeel, and some of the texture, because, especially, when you're talking about acidity and, kind of has some effects of reducing some of the kind of weight within it. Brett, of course, can work on some of the stuff that otherwise might help, produce body in a beer. So you're trying to combat that. Talk to me about how what you have found through some of those experiments with grain and mixed culture beers.
Yeah, we found that if we can sprinkle in higher protein grains, that they tend to allow the Brett to do work over longer periods of time. So like the more kind of complicated grists or more higher protein grists that we put together, they tend to age slower, where like we're sort of like unimpressed with them early on. They taste good, but and then over time they tend to develop more interesting flavors.
It's kind of the basic lambic strategy, right? Use
Right.
unmalted wheat because, it's going to be the hardest thing for, these cultures to ultimately digest, and it's going to give you the longest, slowest fermentation there. I assume you're using unmalted, in some of these, and then how long, what is a sprinkle?
Yeah.
What kind of quantities are you starting to build in these?
Well, we've used, we use raw wheat a lot for sure. I've definitely messed around with unmalted grains. We're usually in the 25 to 30% max for the grains we're trying to test. So it'll be some sort of a base grain.
That is way more than a sprinkle.
Yeah. I guess I did say sprinkle. So, if we're really trying to test it, I want to push it. I want to push it up there. Some of our beers, it's Pilsner malt and a little bit of Munich or a little bit of dextrin type malt, and that's it. But we're going for a quicker turn on that. And we're not. It's just sort of different. So we've been messing around with anywhere between 10 and 20% of that specialty mix, and those beers tend to age slower and develop slower, but they maintain more body over time. We also mess around with our hopping rates. it's like there's tons of bacteria in this culture, and we want that to show up, but I don't want to make an enamel melting product. So then it's like, how many IBUs can we put in there to allow it to happen over time, but not come to the gate first? We sort of want the acidity to show up last, right? So that's another thing that we've been messing with the hopping rates. Usually around like 7%, 7 IBUs has been pretty good in like inhibiting that early growth, but still allowing it to happen. So yeah, we're just for now. Well, that's the
until
thing.
Yeah.
In the mothership, the next beer after I Don't Want to Wait the next wort we put in there, the genetic drift was strong towards the bacteria. I mean, that one went sour quick. It was in the barrel for, I want to say it was 6 or 7 months before I started calling for fruit. I said, this needs fruit. It was peach season. We actually, so whenever we would have packaged I Don't Want to Wait, you got the bottle. It'll probably say it on the description.
1/16/23.
Okay. So that was bottled early 23. So actually by this summer, we took that beer out and put it on cherries, and then we put a highly hopped, but we actually rinsed out the barrel with hot water and a little bit of acid, and we sort of just try to get all the build up of years worth of Solera methodology out of there, and then we put a highly hopped beer in there to try to take any of the bacteria that might be dominating the culture in the wood, sort of tame that a little bit and allow us to continue to use the barrel.
Highly hopped, so what, something in like the 20-ish range, or?
Yeah, this one was 25, I believe, 24, 25. Okay. And it was another type of table beer that we made, but just focused on hops. So it's a little bit more rigorous, I guess you'd call it. Is what we put in there. So excited to see how that one ages. We did try it, and the Brett is developing, and the acidity has not come up at all. pH has stayed basically stable. So happy to see that our plan is working.
You haven't ruined it yet.
Yes, I want to keep this barrel going. It's the only one we've ever used this much. A lot of times, but we've done some Solera stuff in other barrels, or we're really happy with the flavors we're getting out. But a lot of times we're using those once. Maybe the beer's in there for 12 to 18 months, and we're getting rid of the barrel and on to something.
When you we're going through that kind of barrel refresh process, I mean, maybe we don't call it that. Maybe we call it just cleaning it doesn't sound right. I need a great term for this. Yeah. That sounds, recharging, maybe. We would call it recharging.
I like that.
Yeah. When you go through that process, obviously there's this huge, scary risk, because you have something that's produced something that's beautiful and award-winning. You don't want to screw that up. And then when you put, you put new beer in it, there's always that question of, will it ferment?
Yeah.
Is it going to work? What did you do to mitigate your risk on that?
So in this case, we did not put fresh wort in. We put a finished beer. So,
okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So this was a similar to Contessa that you have. This was a Sack Brett stainless ferment that we hopped, like I said, a little bit higher, and ended up, once that was done, packaging some of it and transferring the rest into the punch.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. So we went, if I was going in there with straight wort, I would have put a fresh pitch in.
Yeah. When you're approaching this, obviously with something like I Don't Want to Wait, you were brewing it. You didn't know that it was eventually going to become a fruited beer.
Right.
You're throwing this into a barrel with the idea that it's going to become a beer, and you will make some creative decisions around it when that time comes. If it tastes in a way that you want to release that as its own standalone beer, you do. If you feel like, well, this could really be a nice base, for something else. Talk to me about that creative decision-making process for you and how you go about doing that. And then how you start thinking about maybe some of this other barrel that I have is going to be a nice, counterpoint foil to what I'm getting here. Then we add talk to me a little bit about your creative process around that.
Yeah, it really just comes down to getting to know what's in your barrels. It's creating a blending or a tasting schedule that allows you to kind of keep mental tabs. We keep notes, and And that way, we sort of know what we've got. We've got, oh, this stock over here is a little bit more acidic. This is a little bit more funk forward, or this one has a better body. Sometimes just barrels get thin. So you got to pay attention to the ones that have that body. And then, you pull the components in that you think that you need. In this case, it was like, this beer just tastes super rounded, very balanced. It's dry, but it still has body. It has acidity, but it's not overpowering. It's not a horse blanket by any means, but there's definitely an earthiness and a funk to it. And so it was like, this is going to be a really cool blank canvas to highlight. This is like all of the things I love in mixed culture beer. And like, this is going to take fruit really, really well. We just knew that was something that like, it could just take it up another level if we got some high quality fruit. So we fruited this at about, it was almost 4.5 pounds per gallon of, and we did get them pitted. We unfortunately fortunately and unfortunately, don't have any sort of equipment like that to do it ourselves, but we did get them pitted in the field and then brought them down before we entered the beer into the finished beer into the blending thing.
Let's talk a little bit about that. So then you get them from a farmer,
yep,
pitted. Any other processing before you added them into beer? You're not pureeing them, you're not freezing them. What does that process look like? And then, how are you maximizing, contact between the beer on there? Are there some, temperature controls in order to, you want to keep the beer fresh and lively and not let it just get, oversaturated. How do you manage that kind of fruit addition process in this?
In this particular case, it came down, we were looking at our tank schedule and how long we had and when the beer was ready and those types of things. And so a lot of times our schedule will dictate how we treat fruit. And so sometimes, we have done, so we always purge our blending tank with the fruit in it because I am putting finished beer in there. And I know there's going to be another fermentation, but I'm not necessarily trying to make that super aerobic. So we will always have sort of a mini carbonic maceration that sort of happens because we'll purge that tank.
While it just has the fruit in it?
Well, it just has the fruit in it, yeah. So we have to have the door open and we're putting buckets of fruit in there. And then we purge it and test our tank levels until we're below 1% oxygen, like we would any other time that we're transferring a clean beer. And then we'll put the finished beer on it. In this case, we actually did freeze the cherries because I wanted to, the whole idea of pre-maceration is something I like to mess around with. And we didn't want to immersion blend. We wanted, that the idea of second use fruit was sort of bouncing around in our heads and preserving the fruit as much as possible to have it be something that we might be able to use again was going through our minds. So we're like, rather than blend or create a puree or strictly, do some sort of a quick carbonic maceration, let's freeze them and, kind of modify the cell walls that way. And then we let them thaw, put them in the tank, did our, mini purge, threw it there, and then we transfer the beer on it. So a different steps.
How long do they sit in the purge before you put beer on them?
This was overnight.
You mentioned a mini carbonic maceration.
Yeah, mini, because it was just overnight in this case. Like, a real one would take days.
Right.
So,
sure.
We just kind of like let them sit in there, but they were already frozen. The process already started, and we don't have the ability to do any sort of punch down. Every once in a while, we'll do a gas bubble through the bottom to try to stir up everything and really get, in case we do have a fruit cap, is to try to get that broken up as much as we can. But at that high fruiting rate, 4.5 pounds per gallon, you're getting plenty of fruit that is going to sink and is going to become integrated with the beer, right away. Like, I don't think we're probably sitting on a massive cap the way that we do this.
What kind of temperature and time, plays a part in this kind of fruit maceration for y'all?
We let it do natural. I put it in an unjacketed stainless steel bright tank. And because the beer's been sitting at room temperature. Obviously, there's going to undergo another fermentation of the sugars in the fruit.
Right.
But I didn't worry about that when I fermented it in the oak the first time, so I'm not really worried about it the second time. And usually, the fermentations are strong, but they're not as vigorous as fresh wort in a tank. So I don't know that we're getting excessively hot in there.
Yeah. How much, how long did that additional fermentation take? And then how long do you then let it condition after that on the fruit itself?
Yeah, so we let the whole process finish off in that tank until we have a stable gravity for at least 60 days. And in this case, it took us about 6 months on the cherries to both get the level of fruit color and flavor that we were looking for, and then have 60 days of stable gravity. Because who knows what else might have come along on the fruit. What yeast decides to wake up and really rip on the cherries, and we want to make sure that in packaging a stable product, because then we do bottle condition as well, and usually bottle condition to about 2.8 to 3 volumes. So you don't want to have an oops on that and end up packaging a beer at 3 volumes and then it ends up closer to 4 because the beer wasn't stable. So we give it that 60 days and use a couple of fruit filters to transfer it to another bright tank for bottle conditioning packaging.
So 6 months total in stainless until the thing is done then?
In this particular case, yeah, it was 6 months on the cherries.
That's crazy, Kyle. That's a long time sitting in a tank for one beer.
It is. Drink slow beer, and then the next round was quicker. I don't know. We actually didn't discuss this. So we'd been messing around with second maceration, and we decided to do it because there was so much color and flavor from this beer that we knew that those cherries probably still had some life in them. And so then we took a stainless mixed culture, so Sack Brett stainless fermented table beer that we had aged in barrels, and then put that on these cherries for second use. That beer became Mariah Karaoke, another sort of Brett Saison that has like a very light rosé color and this cool pie cherry flavor, but it's in the background. The oak and the Brettanomyces really lead the flavor profile there. And interestingly enough, that beer won a gold medal at the U.S. Open Beer Championship this summer. So 2 beers, 1 batch of cherries, 2 gold medals in 2023. It's kind of wild. We are very happy with our fruit grower, Dorkan.
I will go on record as saying I love this trend of second use fruit, and I think that it's such a, I completely understand the commercial concerns of selling a beer that has fruit in, when you have a fruit advertised on a label, consumers want to taste that. They want that intense experience. They want to experience the thing that you're telling them that they're going to experience. And, there is no denying that the color like this is just gorgeous and engaging. I mean, it just kind of pulls you in.
Right.
No doubt about that. But in terms of, coming at it from a beer perspective for someone like me, I think that idea of finding ways to knock down some of that fruit character and integrate it into the overall beer makes for a really compelling beer. And so it's kind of amazing and cool that you found ways to do both of those things, hit both of those consumption modes, and make all of these different kinds of consumers happy with different kinds of products off of the same expensive thing that you're sourcing from farmers and paying out the nose for, especially if you're doing 4.5 pounds per barrel kind of
per gallon
maceration.
Yeah.
So per gallon.
Yeah.
Oh God.
It was a ton of fruit. Yeah. That was cool.
That's
so it is from a cost standpoint to be able to use that again. And then, like you said, it's appeal to different customers because some people are only going to want that ruby color of the kriek-inspired beer that I don't want to wait is. They really want to be slapped in the face with cherry. And that's cool because those beers are phenomenal. But to show people that, wow, we can still get a pie cherry flavor in here, but it falls into the background and has more of like a rosé color, is kind of fun for us. We're talking about trying it with other fruits. As we go along, it's just the question is what's going to be the right one. We've got some peaches in that same tank right now, and I don't know if they'll be able to stand up to getting a second round.
Yeah. The other thing I love watching happen in beer this year, maybe the last 18 months total, is brewers packaging in perfectly clear bottles that show off the color of these things, and going right at the natural wine market and saying, hey, you make these funky fruit forward things, with these rosé or bright characters, like, hey, we can do that too.
Right.
And they present so well in this kind of, consumer environment. When you see someone drinking something like that, especially like, at a bar or a restaurant, you're naturally intrigued in the same way that, when I see a golden or a rosé natural wine and someone else is drinking that in this clear bottle, it's like, I want to know what that is, and I want to try some of that. There's just something interesting and, and almost viral, in the experience of it when you're out and about and seeing other people do that. And so I think, watching these trends happen and watching brewers find ways to make beers that can live and thrive in that kind of, clear bottle environment without, skunking and turning into terrible beers. Like, this is all fascinating, and I love watching the creativity of craft brewers pushing into some of these kinds of categories and seeing how that goes. Nonetheless, let's talk about Contessa Table for One, your table saison, quickly before we finish up here.
Yeah.
Obviously, no fruit in this one. This one was definitely a small, light beer where the fermentation character is the primary focus of it, and there aren't a lot of places to hide when you're going at that kind of small beer, in this kind of way. Talk to me about how you found ways to make it clean, interesting, but so kind of cohesive as a table saison.
For sure. So table beers are something that we've been really playing around with a lot lately. And that is thanks to our new head brewer. He's been with us. He's been head brewer for just over a year. He's been with us since 2020, Casey Seymour. And he was actually a huge fan of ours and a customer back when we first opened. I actually have a picture of him waiting in a line around the block for one of our releases from 2017, and has ended up, working for us now and is in the head brewer position. And what's been cool about having him on the team is he sort of reinvigorated my focus and my passion for making sure that we're putting on a lot of cool mixed culture and sour wild ales, just things that are really back to our ethos, our roots. We do all of the beers. We literally make something light, dark, hoppy, sour, fruity all the time. But it's really kind of, he reinvigorated my desire to just focus on making sure we always have a healthy variety of those types of beers, and table beers was something he wanted to mess around with. So you hit it on the head. Like, how do you take a small beer and give it enough fermentation character to taste like a big beer? And so we picked a saison strain that we had liked before, and chatted with Nick a little bit about the direction we wanted the Brettanomyces character to be. We wanted it to be present. And give the beer some of that extra depth, but also not just be way too funky, because it's a little beer. We wanted to make sure it maintained that balance. And so, yeah, we really started playing around with that. Our hopping rates, probably in like that 20 to 30 range, has given a good amount of body without too much bitterness or hop focus to really distract from the little beer. We wanted it to be about the fermentation characteristics. And so as we have done a couple of these, it's been fun to, again, focus on fermentation. And really that comes down to just giving it time in the tank. We do we let our Brett, even though it's pretty much done fermenting, we let those mixed Brett stack beers sit in stainless for at least 5 weeks before bottle conditioning. Give it just a little bit more opportunity to develop before it gets taken to the bottle. Because who knows? Once we decided conditioning is over, it could be 2 weeks, could be 6 months, and we passed it on to a consumer, they might chill it down right away and keep it cold forever, right? So if we're going to make a stainless only beer, we want to at least give it a little bit of opportunity to start to develop some Brett, make that beer a little bit more full and rounded.
What are when you say you are selecting Brett strains to produce a flavor that's hitting where you want to go? I'm curious about that, because certainly for me, and I'm excited to do this episode. I make jokes here and there about breweries that focus on mixed culture fermentation, because it's obviously not the best commercial idea for a brewery.
No.
But I'm so glad that these beers exist and the breweries make these beers. They are such beautiful expressions of brewing and the art of brewing, and they need to exist and they should exist. And I'm glad that you found a way to keep these kinds of things existing, within a context of, some other beers that also, pay the bills for those things. So I just want to get that out of the way right now. For all of my snarky comments about that kind of thing, I absolutely I'm a diehard fan of this style of beer, and I'm so glad that it exists. But one of the things over the last few weeks of tasting all of these beers for our Saison issue was really, capturing this kind of breadth that comes in this world of Brett. A lot more woody character, this year than I've noticed. That is primarily, like a lot of that is Brett driven. A lot of the citrus character that we're seeing, can be Brett driven, and there are definitely these wide, vastly different kinds of approaches to Brettanomyces in this kind of Brett fermentation that can produce very, 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 very different results. From your discussions and from some of your brewing, how do you, have you put a finger on some of the things that are producing the flavors you want, given the ingredients that you have and the way that you go about fermenting? Are there some that you say maybe don't give you the exact thing that you're looking for out of that? How do you make some of these decisions? Where have you landed on some of these Brett decisions?
Having a good relationship with Nick at East Bay has been great for us, because sometimes, you read, and I don't buy all my Brett from him, but a lot of it. Sometimes you read a description of a Brettanomyces strain. It's like reading a description of a new hop. It's all rose-colored glasses. It sounds beautiful. It's good. This is going to be the most amazing yeast I've ever used, amazing hop I've ever used. Produce all the flavors exactly how we want. And sometimes you realize it doesn't. And so to lean on someone in the lab who's actually testing these on a pilot scale and propagating this yeast, he's got a ton more experience. So we can actually ask like very specific questions, like, in your experience, does this yeast result in this type of flavor? How does it co-ferment with sac? Those kinds of questions that we can actually get some answers to ahead of time means that we've got to do a lot less guessing based on either description or trying to find commercial examples with that particular strain. And that's worked out pretty well for us. Also we try to kind of restrain the temperature a little too, and really let the sac strain take the brunt of the early fermentation. And I find that helps keep the Brettanomyces in check a little bit. We're not ending up with these crazy, just Brett forward beers. There's a variety of flavors that are achieved, because we're fermenting, and we'll knock out like 70 on these particular table beers, let it free rise to 78. Like, we're not getting that hot, but at that temperature range, the Saison yeast just rips and creates all those cool Belgian-y esters that we're looking for. And then the Brett sort of just kind of comes in and fills in the gaps later. And that's been working really well for us. That's where we found we get these balanced beers, and then they develop amazing over time. We bottle condition. And so 6-8 months later, when, they've really had some time, is when we find a lot of them really hit their stride. They drink incredible. So, it's definitely the fun part of the journey for us, is to be able to see where they end up. But, we do our best early on to work with the lab, and then also kind of restrain the Brettanomyces activity to get the balance that we're looking for.
That makes sense. And I think it's time to, for us to pull this part of this GABF episode to a close. Kyle, if people want to learn more about 1840 and the beers that you make, mixed culture and not mixed culture, where can they learn more about you all?
Yeah, so come visit us in Milwaukee. That's the best thing to do, is come drink our beers.
I'm going to be there later this week. Yeah. Maybe I will see how the week works out.
Yeah, I've got a beer for you. I got a beer we'll share. So, obviously come visit us. If you're not in the Milwaukee area, though, you can find us on the internet, 1840brewing.com. We're on all the socials. So, come find us. Come share a beer. Drink slow beer.
Awesome. Well, up next, we're going to talk to Joel Stickrod and Spencer Longhurst from Barrique. Before we do that, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega Yeast makes yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. Also, sustainability doesn't have to cost you more. Try Robert's Polypros multi-pack can handles designed for sustainability and cost savings. Grip pack rings are biodegradable and average 5 cents per unit. Craft pack carriers are recyclable and designed with 30% less plastic. Plus, you can save up to 25% on costs. Enjoy easy application with inline applicators and 24/7 support. It's easy to go green with these multi-pack handles. Visit go.robertspolypro.com/cbbpod to request free samples and start saving today. And ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They are proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of the brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. Next up on this GABF Gold episode, joining me from Nashville to talk about Wet Hop Strata, their gold winner in wood and barrel-aged sour beer, are Joel Stickrod and Spencer Longhurst of Barrique. Welcome to the podcast, Joel and Spencer.
Thanks for having us, Jamie.
It's we at GABF hit the tiki party at Bierstadt afterwards and had some Spencer and I met and some nice conversations about brewing, and got me thinking that this whole episode on GABF Gold around mixed culture beer might make sense. I think we tentatively discussed talking about this, but I have to admit I had a lot of beer and tiki drinks that night, so to kind of go back into my memory, like we did talk about this, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
those daiquiris that Jeff makes are pretty potent.
It's my new favorite part of GABF. I will never miss it again. Anyway, thanks for joining me. We want to talk about this, about your approach to mixed culture beer. You all have been sending us beer at the magazine. Obviously, I've been actually drinking over the last few weeks quite a few of the beers that you have sent to us for our Saison and Best in Beer issue that's coming up now. So I feel more familiar with your beer than I ever have. Joel, why don't you talk to us about the history of Barrique? What led you to launch the brewery, and then how did you decide on a focus for Barrique?
Absolutely. So we started in 2017 in Barrique, and the approach at the time was definitely all old world, wild fermentation, open fermented in wine barrels. I'd been working for a different brewery for a couple of years, making a little bit of sour beer, and kind of knew that nobody else would let me open ferment mixed culture beer in their facility, and the only way to do it was to kind of start it myself. So started very small, started with like 50 barrels, and kind of let it grow every year. It wasn't until the third year that Spencer, our head brewer, came on board, and it was 1 year before he was actually employed. We were contracting wort out of the facility he was using. Fast forward a year later, we ended up taking over that facility. Spencer stayed with the building and became our first employee, and has been with us ever since. But definitely the approach was Tennessee ingredients, Tennessee grown grain, Tennessee grown fruit, open fermented in wine barrels, long maturation.
Why such a focus on open fermentation? I mean, that seems that's a big hill to go die on right there.
It's a very hard way to make beer. Kind of everything we do at Barrique is a very hard way to make beer, from our mixed culture program even to our clean pure culture program. Our lager beer is still made in wine barrels. Open fermented is how I was doing it at home in my basement. Once I started brewing sour beer, I kind of went off the deep end and started open fermenting in a small 15-gallon barrel, and had one to age, and then added another one to age, and before you knew it, there was a dozen 15-gallon barrels in my basement that were all open fermented. But really, the beers that I was making, the mixed culture stuff at the other facility that I was working at, weren't the same as what I was able to create at home. And I kind of knew that was one of the special touches that I wanted to put on our brand.
Yeah, what's not the same mean?
It wasn't as deep, it wasn't as complex. It was more kind of monotone. And there was a lot of differences in the process too. It was bigger commercial grain instead of small craft grain. It was lab grade cultures instead of our wild culture that was coming out of my basement. Originally, the first 50 casks were inoculated from barrels that came out of my basement, and we've kept that culture alive ever since. So we take barrels, we stand them up on end, like standard Barrique's wine barrels, stand them up on end. We run about a dozen at a time. There was one year we were running like 20 in like the 2019, no, it's 2021 winter. We were running 2 batches a week and 20 open barrels. And we'll put 3 or 4 batches through them, and then put the head back on, close them, swell them back up, and then use them for maturation casks after that.
It's it is an interesting one with all the breweries that I've talked to and seen, some of the best mixed culture brewers, that I have talked to, whether it's Scratch in Illinois, even Troy Casey at Casey,
Yep.
that had been doing a lot of open top fermentation. That does seem to be a kind of somewhat common theme there amongst them. That do you think that it is the culture itself? Obviously, open fermentation, no head pressure. The history of saison yeast in general, whether it's isolated saison culture or mixed culture, is such that they tend to like to perform and do better work without that kind of head pressure. But for you, is there some kind of symbiosis between the culture that you have developed and that method of fermentation?
I like that method in our case because it's essentially 10 or 12 small fermentations. It's each one's about 1.5 barrels, and we've got a 20 barrel brew house. We can also brew 10 barrel batches on it. Everything at this point goes through our cool ship before the open fermentation, but it's Barrique brewing and blending because we focus on blending from the very get-go. So it stays in those open fermenters for 5 or 6 days and then gets blended out of them. And there's 10 different beers coming out of these open top casks, and kind of the name of our game is all about diversity within our stacks and create as many different colors or flavors to blend with later on. So it works pretty well for us because it's a whole bunch of small fermentations. Especially starting out, it was an economical move as well. Stainless is expensive and
Sure.
barrels are cheap, so it was a economical move of logistical where to ferment the beer.
And speaking of logistics, the logistics of running, 20 different open top fermentations in wooden vessels, transferring wort into them, transferring fermented beer out of them, has to pose some fun challenges for you.
Yeah. And all of our mixed culture beers obviously only made in the winter time. It's a very seasonal approach to making beer.
Okay.
So our kind of November through April is kind of our window, and we work pretty long hours November through April. At this point, it's basically 1 batch a week. We kind of get it on there, and we'll probably do 200 BBL or so.
Interesting. And, I think we all know the lambic justification for that, but you find that it's the same for you in Nashville, that, that warmer weather and open top fermentation don't make for a nice combination.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you've tried it. What's a warm open top fermentation, warm season? Yeah. How does that differ from cold season?
Well, the number one thing is fruit flies.
Oh, okay.
And then beyond that, I think we see a little bit too much like extra production, phenol production that we're kind of, we want a little bit of that, but not the super hot 90-degree ferments.
That makes sense. Interesting. So let's talk about, walk me through, the kind of the design process. Like you mentioned, you're trying to build blending stock because, these beers are not necessarily all single stream beers that start with the recipe and then they end up, the beer in the bottle is the same recipe that you brewed, at least for the mixed culture side of the brewery. How do you, but at the same time, like building a bunch of different recipes means that you're moving a lot of variables at the same time. How do you, control for that? How do you generally start a recipe like Wet Hop Strata and, start, build a basic recipe for that from grain to water and so forth?
There's kind of 2 different approaches to that, or kind of 2 different answers to that. One is the wort stream, and that's where all of it, obviously everything starts. We take a look at what we have in our cellar, go through, taste all the barrels. At this point, we've got about 500 aging casks. And we kind of take a overall
That's a
consensus
lot.
of what
That's
we
a
have.
lot
Yeah,
of
it's
mixed
quite a
culture
bit.
beer.
Yeah,
Oh man.
But we'll take a consensus of what we have and kind of determine, do we need some more just general sour beer? Do we need some more funky beer? Do we need some more saison estery beer? Do we need some bright lemon citrusy beer? And then we kind of, from the get-go of the wort stream, break down what we need to brew for the year. So we don't
So you
necessarily
have
brew the
mental
same.
buckets like that, that you have those 4 categories that you try to kind of generally think about base beers in.
Yeah, and really kind of aged hops is another category that when we start brewing with those, it gives a whole nother layer of depth and complexity. And we want to make sure we have enough of that in our cellar as well. Over the years, and especially now having Spencer as part of the team, we've changed our process quite a bit on the hot side. And a lot of that is combating acidity. And some of those decisions, you don't know the outcome for 2 years. Like our average age is like between 2 and 3 years. It's really easier to talk about by summers. Most of our beer goes through 2 summers. It goes through 1 summer with nothing, and then the second part of the process of how we develop the recipe, what the finished beer is, really comes on that second summer when we start adding the adjuncts, if you will, or the fresh fruit or hops. So it's always beer that's aged through a summer. That's when it gets sour. It's when it gets complexed. A lot of times it's blended at the end of that first summer. So blended when it goes into barrels before a summer, blended after a summer, blended onto fruit, blended off of fruit, blended again before the bottling tank. So blended many times throughout his life, and we're able to kind of build the flavor profiles we're looking for in the final outcome that way. And we use an ingredient that we can get our hands on that as much as we can grown in Tennessee. Fruit-wise, the only one that's not grown in Tennessee is cherries. We have to ship those in from Michigan. They don't grow down here. Same thing, wet hops don't particularly grow very well in Tennessee. So like with this beer, the Wet Hop Strata, we've partnered with Crosby. They're great at getting us wet hops overnighted the day after they're picked and send them to us. So we've been using the Crosby hops for, 4 years now at least. Mm-hmm. And
very cool.
A whole bunch of different varieties that we get from them. Basically anything that they'll ship us in the wet form, we've tried.
Right. Let's talk about some of those base recipes. You mentioned you'll use any ingredients you can get a hand on, but Tennessee grain is a super important piece to that. How does that figure into these recipes that you brew? 100% Tennessee grain. How do you source the grains that build out these recipes? Obviously, if you're building mixed culture beer, you're trying to create a wort that is going to be harder to ferment so that these cultures can work over this kind of time that you're giving it. Talk to me about your process of designing those recipes so that they're going to perform within this kind of mixed culture environment.
Yeah, we can get like Tennessee malted barley, like Pilsner malt or 2-row from 2 or 3 different sources now, from local maltsters around us. Riverbend and Carolina Malt House are the main ones that we use. And then we actually use between 40 and 60% unmalted, like raw Tennessee ground wheat. And we get that straight from a local farmer. So yeah, most of the recipes are at least 40%
to 60% unmalted wheat. Okay.
Yeah, we have a couple like petite saisons that we're really trying to boost the body up on, like Brezette and stuff. So those get about 60% unmalted wheat, and then 40% Tennessee 2-row or Pilsner malt.
That has to be a fun challenge in the brew house itself.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of rice hulls.
Yeah.
And like Joel said earlier, we're fortunate that our brew house can handle 10-barrel batches. It's a 20-barrel system. So when you're doing like an 11 Plato 10-barrel batch in a 20-barrel system, the grain bed is, maybe less than 18 inches thick. So we actually don't see too much lautering issues with it. Less than you'd expect, actually.
Sure. That makes sense. Are there, and so wheat becomes the primary non-barley grain that you use for these just because it's so readily available in Tennessee.
It's so readily available. It's, it's coming to us raw, completely unmalted or modified. So it's relatively inexpensive. It hasn't been adjusted in any way. Yeah. And so that's the bulk of like most of our blonde bases. We do have to get some non-Tennessee malt for things like Flanders and Oud Bruin. They're just not doing any roasting or caramelized malt in Tennessee yet, unfortunately.
Sure. Now, is there any difference, between, say, the Saison base and, these bases that are going into, maybe even higher acidity beers that are, more or potentially into those?
Yeah, we're mostly working with IBUs to control the acidity in our culture.
Okay.
So, like Joel said, we've been gradually stepping up with each brewing season our our IBU threshold to get the acid level that we want. So I think, the first year that I was making wort for Barrique, I think most of the beers were like 15 to 20 IBUs, and everything this year was over 30 IBUs.
Really?
Bordering on 40 on some of the recipes, yeah.
The culture has adapted that much?
Yeah. And even more so if we're destined for really funky beer. I mean, some of our 65, 70, 100 IBU plus, like almost look like IPA recipes, and it just keeps all this acidity completely in check, almost non-existent.
When you say that, you say for your funky beers, so you are specifically trying to optimize for that kind of aged hop funk character over the acidity and massively controlling acidity then.
Yep. And then that becomes blending stock to blend back in at any of the 4 or 5 points later down in the line.
Okay, interesting. Rather than having to be its own finished beer, that will just add that kind of aspect to the finished blended beer.
Yep. And it's usually not cask for cask. It might be 5-10 gallons here. Sometimes it might be an entire cask that goes in.
Okay, interesting. And are there hops that you lean on for that? Because I imagine you want to capture some kind of little bit echo of European flair, the kind of origin for these. Are there some hops when you're pushing that many IBUs into a beer, you're always going to get some of that character out of it?
Especially with the saison stuff, we like diversity, so we brew those with a multitude of different hops, and it makes nice layers within our stacks. We have a surplus amount of aged Cascades. I think they were 2014s or 2015s that we've been aging since 2017, basically. And we brew a handful of spontaneous beer that's obviously all aged Cascades. But we'll brew some kind of saison style recipes that do get the mixed culture with aged hops as well. Sometimes there's some pressure pellets, like high alpha pellets and aged hops together. Sometimes it's just the aged hops.
Yeah, how do you track IBU contribution of aged hops?
It's a big question mark on my spreadsheet.
So no answer. It's just a question mark.
Yeah, we've never sent it out for testing or anything, and I don't know how to begin to try and figure that out. But I would say just like sensorially wise, it's probably, if we boil about a half a pound per barrel for the full 3-hour boil on those spontaneous beers, it tastes pretty bitter. I would say it's probably 30 to 40 IBUs, or at least perceived.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's actually any alpha acid to isomerize anymore, but it's definitely a bitter wort when you knock it out. And
we've brewed them all across the board, anywhere from a half a pound of the barrel at the beginning of a 3-hour boil to, I think we did 3 pounds per barrel, all in the cool ship, like as basically a stand in the cool ship. And I think that we've kind of both found the agreements that with the spontaneous beers that we like early hops and long boil instead of the cool ship edition, or in addition to the cool ship edition. Our cool ship does have a false bottom in it, so we usually rack into it with all the trub and everything. So hops are in there through the entire overnight cool ship process as well.
What do you find the difference, between, cool ship hopping and early hopping and long boil?
It's really the bitterness that Spencer was talking about, and we want that in our younger spawn beer for sure. The late stuff does get pretty fruity if we put it in. I mean, it's essentially a Whirlpool edition with a very long stand. So I like it. Kind of has a mustiness that I like a lot about it, and a nice bitter that ages out. I really think the sweet spot with our spawn beer is at the 2-year mark. A lot of that is because our cellar is not temperature controlled, but I like that's where it's kind of balanced within our processes, where the bitterness has started to subside and the acidity is nice and present, but not over the top. We do make some 3-year blends, but the bulk of those 3-year blends are 2-year cask heavy.
Interesting. So, right. There's that piece of tradition, obviously, that comes out of that Belgian, lambic and spontaneous brewing tradition. But it's interesting to see you apply that to your own American context. And I mean, it's obvious from a philosophical standpoint, it's something that I love seeing, it's even like Jean Vanois has said, you can make spontaneous beer anywhere. I mean, you may not be able to make it exactly the way they make it in the Seine Valley, but you can make it, and you can make it good. And we've seen that all over the place, from Jester King to Beechwood. Obviously, you know, in Nashville, and so a lot of that becomes adapting to the process. It's interesting to hear you say that you know, you found this sweet spot for your aged stock, but I also love the idea that you know, you're focusing on American hops with Cascade versus, you know, say, you know, leaning on more noble varieties. What do you get from that? What you know, what do you know, is that a philosophical decision? Is that a flavor decision?
That's kind of what we were presented with early on. There was another brewery down
Okay.
There was a brewery down in Alabama that had closed their doors, and they were using whole leaf hops, and were basically giving them away. I guess I did one batch in like the 18 to 19 year, but we really didn't start leaning into them until the 1920 winter, which is kind of when Spencer started making the wort. And we really did a couple that year, but the 2021 winter, we made a lot of spawn beer and a lot of aged hop beer. So at that point, our hops had been aging open in a hot warehouse for 4 years, and they've definitely keep changing and evolving. Goodness, we have 300-400 pounds of it, hopefully.
What does your aging process look like?
They're up in the rafters of the brewery, basically.
Okay.
All opened up, exposed. We like to go break the bricks up as far as what we're going to use for the next year, the summer before. So some of them are still...
they're sitting up there baled then?
Yeah, they're in 10-pound bales.
Oh, okay.
So it looks like a 44-pound hop box size, but 10 pounds. So most of them are just opened on the top to expose just the top of the air. And then kind of at the end of the brewing season, we like to go and just put them in like Rubbermaid tubs and break them apart. And that's usually what we use for the next year then.
I love watching everyone's methods, from the Jester King barn with bags in the rafters to Grimm in New York City that has bags kind of hanging high on the walls. You know, it's interesting. Or the Vale, where you know, Matt has his bins and he's, you know, reshuffling.
Yeah, rotating them through. Yeah,
he's almost got like a Solera of aged hops there in some sort of way. Interesting to see how, you know, American brewers are doing this. You know, and those just sit out in ambient, you know, year round.
Yeah, the pallet is right on top of the boiler room, on this mezzanine on top of the boiler, so it's pretty hot up there.
Oof. Especially in Tennessee summers, it's very hot.
Yeah. Now, I assume because you're trying to, you know, take this natural approach to beer, that you're not doing a ton with, you know, water chemistry. But you know, how do you treat water for these beers?
Yeah, for all the mixed culture beer, we just roll with the Tennessee water, the national municipal water. It goes through a carbon filter, and I tree boil all of our brewing liquor, just precipitate on any extra minerality. Yeah, but other than that, it's just, you know, Cumberland River water.
Sure. Well, let's talk about, you know, the blending process. You know, you brew these worts, you throw them in, you know, go through your fermentation process, put them in barrels. I mean, are you using a pretty, you know, consistent barrel stock, or do you vary, you know, barrel stock that you are aging these into?
They're all neutral wine barrels, or they come to us at what the wineries consider neutral. I would say that because we're not temperature controlled, we're definitely getting more oak exposure than the wineries think, because they're generally in a temperature controlled warehouse. Tennessee, it's just like whiskey. It moves in and out of the barrels in the summertime when it gets hot in our warehouse. We also age our beers for comparatively a pretty long time. You know, it's 2 to 3 years in oak. So we have a nice oak structure and tannin to just about all of our beers that we produce. But as far as what the type of barrel is and what it is, it's a vessel for us. So that's a place to put it for that extended period of time. We will take some specialty barrels and finish, much like Scotch uses like a sherry or a port barrel to finish theirs. We'll take Tennessee whiskey barrels or bourbon barrels and kind of round out some of these blends and give it vanilla and char and booze, and use that as a finishing barrel. Those are usually one and done. The neutral barrels, we use them until they make bad beer. We obviously coop our barrels daily. Probably just about every barrel in our cellar at this point is, I think every barrel's been opened up and cleaned on the inside. There's a lot of kind of like wine stone that's left behind in them that you really just got to get in there with some elbow grease and get some of those crystals off. Every now and then you'll find a blister on the inside that's filled with, you know, wine on the backside of it that you want to pop and open up. But because they become open top fermenters, almost everything has gone through that process. So especially in the wintertime, we're taking, goodness, 10, 15 barrels apart a day and hit it with elbow grease, hit it with a pressure washer, put them back together, swell them. Our steamer runs nonstop in the wintertime.
Highly manual process. So then let's walk through blending. You decide, you've now got, you're looking back at your stock from, the previous year or 2 summers ago, or, that's past its 2 summers. You're not, you kind of know what you have, but then you have to think about the beers that you're going to make from what you have. It's not necessarily an automatic process at that point. How do you start to create the products that you're then going to, to package, or to at least think about this next step that these are going to take as you start moving these into the next phase, and making some decisions? Are you sampling all of these barrels and then saying, oh, we could make this and this with this? Are you coming up with like, I would love to make this kind of thing, and what do I have that could kind of fit into that? Talk to me about the creative process, and then how you go about, narrowing down your options into what you're ultimately going to make and release it as beers.
It's definitely a retroactive, like back end approach, where instead of having a concept from the get go and say, this is what we're looking to make, I like to allude it to kind of painting pictures with the colors we've created. So we'll go through and see what we have, taste pretty much everything in the cellar right at the beginning of the blending season. The blending season's right about now, kind of before the brewing season starts, because we want to fill the barrels right back up with fresh beer. But we'll go through, and it's a balancing act of making sure that our tasting room board is balanced, and that we have peach beer and strawberry beer and wet hop beer and cherry beer and bourbon barrel aged beer. And really, like, we have to think 4 to 6 months ahead when we're blending, because we battle THP in the bottles pretty bad. So it's half of what do we need and half of what do we have. So like for the wet hop project, for instance, there's probably 40 different casks in the cellar of wet hops of different various stages. Some of them have been on the wet hops for 3 months at this point. Some have been on the wet hops for 15 months at this point. And we'll go through and pull
you are aging this beer on wet hops for 15 months?
Yeah. One of the casks that went into the Wet Hop Strata was from the previous season and been on the hops for 15, 16 months until it was blended in. One of those casks was on second use Strata wet hops, so we had pulled a Strata beer off the year before and then put another wort on top of that. And one of them was a double strength. So instead of 10 pounds in one cask, it was 20 pounds in one cask.
DDH.
So there was 3 different components of 3 different ages.
DWH, right? Double wet hopped, right?
And it was 3 different base beers.
That should be a thing, right?
It should, DWH. So really, we look at, we always want to make a wet hop reserve, or we've been trying to, which is kind of a blend of all of the wet hops, or whatever we think fits into the blend. So we kind of try and nail that one down first, and then we look at what other casks stand out to do like a single strain or get fruited with them. So we've done like peaches and Strata wet hops blended together before. Some of them, I like to put some of the same bases on that work and kind of complement the hops. So like the Idaho 7 go on top of a pretty citrusy base. The Amarillo go on top of an orange base. The Strata goes on a pretty neutral blonde base. The Strata wet hops themselves, like with the way that we process them and age on them, and with our culture, it gives a ample amount of passion fruit that is very unique. And I've never gotten that out of the hot side. Strata on the hot side is very dank and marijuana and weedy, but extended aging on top of these wet hops with it already acidic and complex beer, it screams passion fruit jumping out of the glass. It's a really unique situation there. We've done Sterling before that went on like a lime, kind of more limey citrus base. So we kind of try and pair the barrel to the hop and then blend on the backside.
We're getting truly weird here, which is what I absolutely love. Because, when I was thinking about this, it's like, you're going to macerate on wet hops. But no, you're macerating on different concentrations of wet hops, different years of wet hops that have been aging on those wet hops for different kinds of... And then you're blending you're choosing hops with the base beer based on the flavor of that base beer and the way that's going to. Okay, this is awesome. But I love the kind of intention and complexity that comes with this. I mean, I think we're now going to have to redefine wet hop beer because, it's wet hopped, but it's then sitting on wet hops for 15 months. That is the strangest wet hop process that I've ever heard a brewer employ for that. But, what you mentioned is really interesting. How does that mixed culture interact with the flavors in wet hops? What do you find in working in that kind of environment, and how, your culture then pulls different flavors out than, say, what a normal IPA brewer making, a beer with wet hops might get?
That's a little hard to say because we don't have the opportunity really to do wet hops on the hop side, just because we're so far away. We're typically working with like anywhere between 20 and 60 pounds of each variety, and it's 10 to 20 pounds per cask. If we were in the Northwest or if we had hops that grew, I'd love to make a harvest ale, especially like on our pure culture side. But I don't have very much experience with that. I don't know that Spencer's ever made a harvest ale either. I mean, it's just kind of the part of the country that we're in. This is the way that we're able to use them. We've tasted the barrels young, and they're very different when they're on hops for 2 to 3 weeks than they are on hops for 2 to 3 months versus 15, 16 months.
What is that difference?
They're pretty grassy early on, and as it ages out, they become very fruity.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive to what you would think. Like, they definitely. I was really big proponent of let's get the hops off quicker at first, and then we tasted the beer on the hops after like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and it's just kind of polyphenolic and grassy, like you would kind of expect with a longer contact on hops. But once they've gone through 6-7 months on the hops, it definitely, I think the low pH and the alcohol content must be coaxing out some different compounds.
Yeah, and maybe
it definitely mellows out and definitely comes through completely different than it does super young.
And it could be Brettanomyces that's metabolizing some of these compounds and breaking them down into other fruity flavors as well. It's kind of interesting when we're talking about the wet hop is last year in GABF specifically, we put the wet hop reserve in GABF last year. We put it in the wet hop category. And basically the judges came back and said, this beer is really unique and really cool, but it's not a wet hop beer. Try putting it in barrel aged sour. So this year we chose the Strata. I mean, when we sat down and looked at all the GABF entries, we sat at the bar and had a whole bunch of different bottles open and tasted through. And Spencer was really better at that than I am as far as like pairing with the category. And we chose Strata and put it into barrel aged sour like they suggested last year with the wet hop, and that's what they were looking for. So it worked pretty well for us. But
sure.
Our gut was put it in a wet hop, and we're like, it's going to be unique, it's going to stand out. But that's not what the judges were looking for on that day last year.
Interesting. So then, the double wet hopped and the short contact, add in these additional kinds of blending characters and different kinds of aspects of that fresh hop, thing that you're trying to capture in this. What are those?
Yeah. And that's all about, balancing the beer out. And there was actually some spontaneous beer blended into that as well, just to give another layer of depth and complexity. I mean, you've tried a lot of our beers, and that's really what we're looking for is very deep, complex beers across the entire program. And there's different acidity levels, there's different fruit forward levels, there's different hop component levels, and it's kind of building the full palatable experience. And once again, it's not entire casks that go in. It's, we'll do benchtop blends with portions and then recreate that in the blending tank and start small and scale up until we find something that we feel enjoyable.
And, so in addition to fresh hop varieties, you've also extended this out into fresh hops and fruit on top of that. What was the impetus behind that? And, how does that process vary? I mean, is this now then a blend of, fruited sour beer and the wet hop sour beer that's then, done through the same kind of blending process? Or is this now we take the next step after we've achieved a blend that we've come up with? And how do you start thinking about how you're going to, are you leaning into flavors that you're sensing in some small way in this already, or are you trying to, build some contrast with what you have there? How does that creative process look?
It's definitely about building contrast, I think. And we've even gone as far as taking fruited beer from the summer before and putting it onto wet hops instead of putting a neutral barrel on. And we've done it the other way of taking wet hop beer and put it onto fruit. And it goes back to diversity. And it's nice to balance our board with something other than just Amarillo wet hop, just Strata wet hop. And peaches has worked really well. I did one cask with watermelon one time, and that one's still sitting on it. It's pretty weird. We'll see if it can blend it at some point, but it's kind of nice for the consumer on the back end, because they are pretty fruit forward beers with our approach to it. And then it's balancing that or complementing that with other actual fruit additions. All the fruit we use is whole fruit. It's all grown in Tennessee. It's all hand processed. Back to the seasonal process. It's the summertime is standing around cutting fruit. The wintertime is brewing into barrels and cooping. But it's all about, complementing what's already there or trying to coax it to go in a direction where we want it to go.
You guys have obviously been doing a lot of experimenting around this in a lot of different, facets. Are there some things that haven't worked for you, or some experiments, with these that you've really learned from and won't be repeating?
Wet hops on dark beer hasn't worked for us.
Okay.
We tried that a couple different times, like on a Flanders or a Brewing. Centennial wet hops haven't worked for us very well. They're pretty lettucey. They never get kind of those fruit flavors that we're looking for. We've dumped a lot of strawberry beer, and kind of have narrowed our strawberry source down to just one farm that works really well. But there's 3 or 4 different farms that those berries were given plasticky or Band-Aid or sometimes chemically. We've definitely dumped a lot of beer. We've definitely missed the window on certain barrels that just aged too long and either didn't have the capacity for bottles or didn't have the capacity to get into a tank at the right time. So it's a lot about managing that. And like you said, 500 casks is quite a bit. I think the most that we brewed was 400 BBL in one year. And at this point, we're kind of brewing 250 BBL a year. It's kind of a sweet spot for what we're selling and what we're have the ability to package and blend through.
Sure. How often do you go through and, taste and evaluate those barrels? I imagine it's, you brew them and let them sit for a long time, and then you start tasting, and maybe start tasting a little bit more frequently.
Yeah. I mean, it changes so much in the first summer that I kind of stopped pulling nails on the younger beer. Yeah. That being said, we've started blending some younger, especially this year. We brewed a lot of more bitter Saison, and we've blended a lot of that into some of our final blends that have came out this year. And it's kind of nice to have that younger note in there as well. But there was a couple of years where we didn't taste them until they were through a summer. There was some barrels that we moved over. We moved cellars in 2021, and there were some barrels that were brewed in 2019 that didn't even a nail in them when they moved over to the cellar. And most of those barrels were great, honestly. And some of those barrels just got packaged in the last couple of weeks. So, but once they get a nail in them, and especially as we're getting towards the end of the summer and the beginning of the kind of blending season, we'll go through and taste quite a bit. You can only really taste so many at a time, so you get through 16 or 20, and then you kind of have to take a break and come back the next day. So we'll just work our way down the cellar. Sometimes it's me and Spencer and our other production teammate Mark that all 3 go through, and sometimes it's just me with a notepad and a piece of chalk. It's kind of funny to see some of our notes and scribbles on the barrels sometimes with chalk, and then a pretty doctor's notebook that nobody could read but myself, I think.
Sure. You mentioned earlier that that managing THP is something that you all have to pay attention to. Let's talk a little, just as we finish up here, talk about the bottle conditioning process.
Sure.
And how what you've learned about managing that in your finished beer, and how that has impacted some of your process around that.
In the last probably 2.5 years, we really put more of an effort on getting active bottling yeast going in an Erlenmeyer or a Carboy, the day of packaging or the day before. We found that just gives us a more consistent carbonation right away, and it helps clean up the THP a little bit quicker than stuff we've tried everything. We've tried wine yeast, specific bottle conditioning yeast. We'll take sometimes top crop off of the open tops and throw that in the blending tank. But yeah, we've had the most luck and success getting a flask going with just a light dextrose solution with some just CBC1 cask bottling yeast. So we'll see carbonation within the first couple weeks, and then depending on the season, obviously it's a little warmer in our warehouse in the summer, we can clear THP in sometimes 4 to 8 weeks, and as we're cooling down through the winter here, anything that gets packaged right now we're probably not going to be releasing until the spring.
It's a nice long process then.
Yeah.
It's not as much managing the THP. It's gonna be there.
Yeah.
And it's just waiting it out, and it always clears up on us. And even when we do a little bit of package into bag and box that isn't re-fermented, it's packaged still, and we've had those get THP, and there was one that took well over a year to clear up, but it eventually went away, and that's without re-fermentation. We're pretty lucky that our third production member, Mark, is a super palate taster for THP. And I joke sometimes that he gets THP in his toothpaste in the morning. But it's really nice to have that aspect and on our team, and somebody that can go through and say, if Mark clears it of THP, we know it's good to go.
It's fair. Well, I think it's a good time to wrap up here, and I appreciate you guys talking with me about your process with Wet Hop Strata. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. BSG and HVG bring you a Mira with classic hoppy, slightly herbal, and zesty lemon aromas. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. AccuBrew helps you detect problems before they ruin a batch. ProBrew has rotary can fillers in stock with a 2 to 4 week lead time. Omega's thiolized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. Go green with multi-pack handles from Robert's Poly Pro, and ABS Commercial can design the perfect setup for you. If you've enjoyed this podcast, any others, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and help support us bring you great brewing content week in and week out. Joel and Spencer, if people want to learn more about Barrique, where can they learn more about you all and the beautiful mixed fermentation beers and award-winning mixed fermentation beers that you make?
BarriqueBrewing.com is the website. On the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Barrique Brewing.
Cool. Thanks for talking with me. It's been great. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media @craftbeerbrew.